Ladies and gents, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by a veteran of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And I got Mark here with me. So Mark, say hello and introduce yourself, please.
Hey, Eric. Thanks a lot for having me on. I love listening to the show, and I'm really excited to be on here and join you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you reaching out. It's been awesome to meet you and talk to you and, share our perceptions. We've been in the policing game pretty close by, just across the border for roughly the same amount of time, man. So it's really cool just to connect with. I think this has been a gift, this technology age we're in with social media and things like this, where you can see that, we have a lot of the same parallels. We have a lot of the same focus on wellness and very similar experiences, similar outlooks on police and what we need and what the culture needs. And so, yeah, man, I appreciate you being on here. I'm excited to get into a lot of it. And maybe, we'll only be able to scratch the surface, I'm sure. But
yeah, me too. I'm excited. I've enjoyed listening to your program, and I think you're an important voice that brings some realities of like frontline policing and just what it is, but also has a really positive outlook and wants to have a positive impact on police culture. And I studied a bit about police culture, and really what it is, it's when the senior people teach the new people how to manage internal and external problems in a way that's worked well enough. And historically, some of what we've been teaching and doing has not really worked,
mm-hmm.
And I think you're passing on a really positive message, not just for those people that want to be cops, but also for society, because there's times when society also doesn't understand policing, and that also causes us a lot of problems in policing. So I think the messages you share are so important, and that's why I reached out to you.
Yeah, thank you, man. And yeah, even when we were talking before, I one thing that stuck out to me towards the end of our conversation was when I was just sharing, why I even started the social media page and reflections on that and how it's been a good outlet. But, even debating that, because I'm like, man, there's a lot of pages that talk about first responder or police wellness. And there's a lot of pages and good content that, podcasts or whatever, right, that talk about, kind of building public trust and just trying to be transparent, just help those not in the career learn more about it. And really quickly, you're just like, man, it's not about like another competing voice. It's just, we just need more, right? And you're going to reach a number of people that others wouldn't reach, either in your circles or maybe in your niche or personality type that's just going to resonate better. And so it's just about putting more of it out there. And I think that that's absolutely true, right? Just to get more content, more information out is really what we're going to need to start to change the tide of all these stigmas. And we're going to get into that. But all the kind of traditional old ways of thinking that clearly aren't working today.
Yeah, totally. And that's how it changes, is the people who've been through some stuff share what they've been through and what they learned the hard way. And even like, obviously I've started writing a book about it, or spent a few years writing a book about it. And that's really where it came from, where my motivation was, and my way of helping and sharing was take the stuff I needed to learn the hard way that I wish, why did I suffer for so many years when there is a better way? Why did I manage through drinking for so many years that was so devastating for me, when there's healthy outlets to process some of these things? So that's where, again, I love your message around health and wellness and just having some of those hard conversations.
Yeah, thank you, man. And yeah, your work is going to be greatly appreciated. I got a sneak peek, and we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. But if you want to start off, for the listeners, definitely would love you to share how you got into law enforcement, what the start was like, what brought you into the career, and how it's been for you.
Yeah, I like a lot of people. I'm not exactly sure. I know some people come from like a policing family where it's like generational. That's not me. I come from a family of accountants. My dad still runs an accounting company. He loves it. My brother works there. My sister works there. I even worked there briefly. But what I did see as a kid was people break into my dad's business all the time, and people would steal the vehicles at his business. And you just saw the impacts of like crime in society, in our community. And a friend of mine started going on some ride-alongs, and we were coaching hockey together at the time, and he would come in just raving about best night ever, can't believe what happens. And started to pique my interest. I was kind of wrapping up university, and my degree at the time was in political science with a minor in economics. And for anyone who wants to do a political science degree, it's interesting, but when you finish, there aren't a lot of people who want to hire you to political science, So it's
Yeah.
important for kids to kind of know what they're getting into school wise and then what you can do with it. So I started looking around, and every time I take another step towards policing, I liked it. So I started volunteering and I liked it. Right. And then you go on some ride alongs. I was like what you'd call a reserve, which in
Yeah.
some places called an auxiliary. But basically, you're a volunteer with a uniform. You don't get a gun, but you get all the other tools and you help do police work. And just saw awesome people doing awesome, meaningful work, and just kept, taking one more step towards it. And then obviously applied and got in, and it's been a really positive thing for me.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Yeah, it's nice when you have that kind of inner window. It sounds like that your buddy was that for you, and then you're able to get in and start kind of conceptualizing and start imagining it. And yeah, it's funny. I graduated with political science as well, and for me, it was trying to pivot and change my focus and change my studies, and then trying to get out on time, which I did. But I did have the assumption, even before I knew police was going to be what I was going to do, I had the assumption that I was going to have to go back for more school to do anything really crazy specific. So
Yeah, well, a lot of times political science leads to law degrees or to other things after
right,
teaching or whatever you want to do. I just like became interested in politics as a kid, and I really at first thought I'd go the economics road, and it's just a bit more math and a bit harder.
yeah,
And
yeah, me too. Yeah,
yeah, I just found my way down political science, and it was interesting to learn, and I think it helps you in society. Like, you know how to just understand what the messaging you're hearing, from
yeah.
about politics and government, and often I think at times we're kind of misled. Like everyone has an agenda that they're putting out,
What?
and
No
a
way.
spin that they're putting on it, and it often doesn't line up with reality. So it helps you to be a critical thinker and analyze the world and how you want to see it.
But it's in the news, man. It's the news. It's facts, right?
Yeah. Well, if only
No,
we change our how we all interact too, like that everyone has a camp and a side and it's my side and that
Mhm.
side has to always be right instead of
Yeah,
like just, you and me could be in a different political spectrum but still be working towards a shared good. And I think in,
yeah.
in society we used to have more of that. And now it's been more polarized, which has been bad for us.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but after learning about so much about political theory and about lobbying and all these things, I actually got really, kind of cynical about the whole thing, and I really didn't care much to talk about or learn anything more about politics after I was done with school. So I don't know what your stance was on it. I was more disillusioned, I suppose.
Yeah, I found a bit of that too, but I also found some really good people in politics. I'm really lucky. Our local politician is a huge advocate for like PTSD and mental health and first responders and suicide prevention, and honestly, just a good person as well, which is so impactful. And there's good politicians out there. I think it's just a bit harder to find, and sometimes there's people doing it more from the self-interested side, which,
Yeah,
to me it should be, it's like, why do you want to be a cop? To me it should be that you want to help people, and
yeah,
that is for me what I say. And like you, I wasn't in a formal recruiting position, but I did kind of help off the side of my desk and did some interviews. What does
hmm,
every cop come in and say they want to do? I want to help people.
yeah,
Right. And we joke about it once we're on the job because we often
yeah,
don't feel like we're helping anyone. We go to the
hmm,
same things over and over again, and we're kind of trying to solve societal problems that we often can't solve. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, it's why I'm writing my book. I want to help people. And I would guess it's why you're doing your podcast. It's the same idea. And why you're putting stuff out in social. It's, hey, you want to help people in your way too, right? That brings us
yeah.
like meaning and purpose and connection. And I think that's kind of what life's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and we all have our little experiences and our little outlooks, but by sharing and uh, sharing information, sharing outlook, sharing perspective, sharing experience, sharing mistakes, right? And that's a lot of what we both are trying to do, right? Like, hey, next generation or even current generation, right? Heed these words or don't. But I mean, if I can help prevent you from making these mistakes, then that's fantastic, right? Like just paying it forward and just helping to build understanding and community, whether that's in law enforcement, whether that's interacting with law enforcement, it's all part of it for sure.
Yeah, totally. I'm on the same page.
Yeah, man. Um, So what tell us about some of your maybe assignments or some of your incidents that were highlights for you.
Okay. Well, I spent about a year in like forensics. I wasn't a forensic member, but I had an injury, so I was just kind of helping them.
Mm,
Did about 5 years on patrol or general duty up here in my organization. We call it general duty, but a lot of places call it patrol, which was great. That's what we all picture when we sign up to be a cop. Is like you run off, you get the calls and 911 calls, and you go and help people and deal with whatever it is. I started field training, and I really enjoyed getting to like help mentor the next generation and teach and coach. Still to this day, some of my recruits are some of my best friends, which you go through intense things together, and it forms
yeah.
strong bonds, strong friendships. After that, I did about almost 6 years on an emergency response team. So up here in Canada, that's what we call SWAT, or what, like for layman terms, what some people would call SWAT. It was a pretty busy full-time team, suburban Vancouver, essentially. Most of Vancouver. Vancouver itself has its own team, but our team did the rest. And then I timed out. We had like a limited amount of time you could stay. So after that, I'd been commuting pretty far away where my wife was working and living,
Hmm.
and it's about a 6 hour drive. So I'd have to like stay at my parents' place to work and then go home. And we had a family, so that changed, and I had to be home more. So I transferred to the RCMP and got back onto the emergency response team. So that was 2020. And yeah, that's definitely been a highlight of my career, is the chance to work on ERT. You meet amazing people. You get all kinds of incredible opportunities for training. I've got to go on ride-alongs in the air ambulance. I've done whole shifts in the ER with like some
Hmm.
awesome doctors teaching me about medical stuff. Had about 10
Oh,
years as a medic now. Um, so yeah, essentially, I think you go through really intense things, and it forms super strong bonds and friendships. And to me, growing up, that was hockey. Like I was big into sports and hockey,
yeah.
and I still to this day, some of my best friends are the guys I grew up playing hockey with, because you go
Mm,
through hard things together and they have your back. And there's a comparable in policing. When you're on patrol,
absolutely.
you go through hard things, and like some of my best friends are still from my patrol time that we haven't worked together in 10 years, but we still stay in touch and have that connection. And now I have the same thing with ERT, where you have all these brothers they'd do anything for you, at the drop of a hat. And that to me has been the best part of my career. It's getting to form those awesome friendships and really getting to help people. Like, I mean, you probably see it on your day-to-day level. What calls impact me the most? It's the ones where you have a real positive impact in the community. It's where,
Yeah.
like, I've had calls where you go solve a B&E that day, and you go get things back for people, like thousands of dollars of stuff and things that have sentimental value, and the level of like gratefulness that they have and the meaning it brings to them. Like, they can't rebuy some of these things. It's stuff from their wedding, it's photos,
Yeah.
it's like, and it's stuff that the person who stole it was just going to throw away. Like, it's heartbreaking, but when you get it
Hmm.
back for
Hmm.
them, it's so impactful. And those are the special days for me where you get to do that, because there's other hard days, right? So I jokingly say that it's like, there's days where I would do this for free, and there's days where you couldn't pay me enough to do it. And as an example, I used to say that to my last boss. I was in traffic or highway patrol for a bit, and I would say that about catching and deterring drunk drivers. Like, you catch enough drunk drivers, you're saving someone's life. And so
Yeah.
I feel super passionate about setting up roadblocks, and I could catch a drunk driver most nights if you freed me up to go do that. There's enough of them out there, and you hope that that's going to make a big difference. So sometimes you don't see the impact on those ones, but sometimes you do. And I'd say those are the kind of things that bring me the most meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I love that you talked about this, and we're recording, but when this airs, it's going to be in June, and it might be really close to when another interview airs. And it's one of my buddies that was on the SWAT team for a number of years, and so yeah, he has a lot of really significant, and I'll say he wouldn't say, but I'll say hero moments. Really intense situations, super dangerous. But we had a similar conversation, right, where he's saying a lot of times it's more of the quote unquote normal calls, but if you remember and you empathize and you don't get cynical, don't allow yourself to fall into that compassion fatigue, like this is a really big deal. This is a crisis, right? You're losing these precious artifacts that cannot be recreated, right? And so when you talk about those sentimental items, to be able to recover that really changed the tide of I mean, certainly someone's day, maybe their year, maybe decade, right? It's something that we can get over, that sort of loss, but to not have to is huge for a person or for a family. So I love that you talk about that impact, because I think a lot of times, after a number of times, after a number of incidents and trauma and stress, we do forget. And it sounds and feels cheesy when I try to remind people to remember the little calls. And, hey, a drunk driver is literally saving lives if you get one off the street. And you're absolutely right. We can't do roadblocks down here, but same thing. You can see them, you can actively find them, especially times of night generally. But yeah, it's one of those things where a lot of times I think we lose sight of what we can do in our role and our responsibilities that the average person cannot. Just to have that potential for effect is huge.
Yeah, and feeling like you have an impact. Because at the end of the day, you do, and you certainly have the chance to. And like, I would often carry like investigations, and it might last a year where you keep digging through the records whenever you have a spare minute in the middle of the night, and eventually you get like I had one where it turns into you get the phone records. I had like 6 months of phone records from
Hmm.
an identity fraud account, and eventually I phoned the out of town numbers because who lives out of town? Generally, it's your family. Well, it turns out they're like, oh, the only people I talk to is my grandkids, and that led to a landline in the house that got me a warrant that basically I shut down what I'd call like a credit card factory. We got like
Yeah.
thousands of credit card numbers and all kinds of like they're doing so much crime in the community. They're bringing so much like hardship to the community. And when you get a chance to do something about that, it's so impactful. So to me, I try and find that meaning in like all the little interactions of the day. And even something like being in traffic, my goal in a traffic stop is to have someone thank me at the end of the stop. Even if I give them a ticket, just
Yeah.
treat them with kindness and respect and dignity and like, hey, you got a cracked windshield and a headlight out. Like, how long do you need to fix that? Hey, can I have a month? Sure, that sounds fair. Like, and they leave there being like, oh, that was reasonable,
Hmm.
And even if they need a ticket, like, you can still do it in a way where they like you and me are going to get pulled over. You know what I mean? Our family is going to get pulled over. How do we want them to be treated?
Right.
Probably like they're a person and not, not just yelled at or something. So I try and just find the meaning in all the little things that we do. And I think, meaning and purpose brings us like happiness. That's what we're meant to have those things, but our job can affect that, right? Like, let's be honest. You've probably seen a lot of new cops getting hired in your role. And I've watched a lot of people and I've helped some people get hired. And often like they're such nice people. And then after a few years on the job, that cynicism kicks in, and
Hmm.
you go from this, Dr. Gil Martin writes about it in Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement.
Right.
But you go from this idealistic rookie to this like jaded veteran where you're pretty grumpy. And when you think about what cynicism really is, we go from a world where everyone tells us the truth. In theory, people lie a bit, but in general, day to day, and then all of a sudden you go to being a cop and everyone lies to you like
Yeah.
constantly. I mean, I just had a new recruit. I was telling you last night, it's his second shift. And that's the first thing I told him is like, you need to shift your mindset from your world where everyone tells you the truth to a new world where most people are going to lie to you a lot. And you need to check and confirm things. But then we can take that home and interact with our families that way. Like the hard part
Hmm.
actually at first is turning it on, but then eventually becomes turning it off. And that actually ties into hypervigilance, which I heard you speaking about it a little bit on one of your episodes of like, oh, I'll, park nose in or put my hands in my pocket or whatever it is. I do the same thing, man. Like, we're not meant to live in fight and flight for the rest of our life. And when I
Hmm.
was off work, I lived in fight and flight. Like, I did some blood tests and they check your hormones and chemicals in your body. And they're like, you're so stressed that you live like a ninja's ready to jump out of the closet and attack you all the time,
You're
even
right.
though it's not. And you need to find a way to have healthy rest and healthy downtime, but you don't right now. And it's good for us to have that. And I'm not saying be unaware, but it is important to find whatever you can to do that. And
Yeah.
I thought it was great that you were talking about it.
No, thank you, man. And that you've covered a lot of ground. So I want to rewind a little bit and focus in a couple things for those that listen and are, trying to wrap their head around a career in law enforcement, or those that are newer cops. And yeah, you talk about, I guess to start earlier on, you're talking about impact, right? And hey, although you're busy and you have this, this fraud case, you just work on it a little bit here and there, because so much we've had I know you've had it in Canada, but we've had it, in Washington State. But a lot of reform laws, and people feel like their hands are tied. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do this. Staffing's low, so it's call to call. It's like, okay, I get you. It's fine. You can vent. You can feel bad for yourself for a moment. Like, use that, right? Whatever. Be angry, and now, like, it's time to move on, right? If you stay in it, right? Think about all the things you can do. Think about all the things that a common person cannot do, right? So maybe it does take you a year to crack that case, but man, if you are an engaged cop and you're devoted, you can do that. Whereas so many people are not. They just kind of want to throw their hands up. They're like, well, I don't have the time, or detectives won't take this because they're only taking higher, higher losses, or this level of felony or violent crime right now. So I guess it's just closed. It's like, no, you can do stuff, right? And so that ownership, I think, is huge. The reminder of that you can control your outlook and you can control your output is huge. But then also, like, the hypervigilance piece, right? Like, that we're just talking about. And you talk about, the cynicism that happens for, a couple year cop. I think it took me about a year and a half. And some of that was exactly what you talked about. It was, my first field training officer telling me my first two lessons was, and I was decently sheltered, right? I was, a pretty good kid and stayed out of trouble, and pretty safe area that I grew up in predominantly. But yeah, lesson one was everyone lies, and lesson two is everyone's stupid. So even if they, even if they don't intend to lie, they might be lying. And that's a bit extreme. And I've spoken on that in another episode that I don't believe has aired yet, but I'm kind of saying, hey, like, as an impressionable young cop, these are the things that he told me to keep my head out, to stay vigilant, to be aware, and to help me survive. However, I adopted a lot of that in the effort to survive, even to the point that you're talking about, right? You're talking to your friends, and you're cynical, you're doubtful, you think everyone's trying to deceive you now. You're like, no, 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 it's still the regular world. It's just, you're just more wary of certain situations, and trying to find a balance so that you are safe on the street, you are safe at work, but you're not having it overburden your system, as you prove through blood work.
Yeah, I would say what happens is it basically becomes maladaptive in our life. So you go to work and you need that to be safe and, like, be hyper vigilant at work, because someone is going to have a gun pulled on them at a traffic stop or a domestic. So practice all the safe habits you can. But then we're just not meant to live like that 24/7, right? It's like you're living in that sympathetic overdrive, right? So again, Dr. Gil Martin would call it like the emotional roller coaster. You're living on the high
Mm-hmm.
end, and then you come home and now you're that tired, apathetic, lethargic, like you don't want to do anything other than just lay in bed or lay on the couch. And you need to find a way to bring yourself out of that, back to a normal baseline, but also be mindful of how, like, I've had it where you're out in public and you're looking around like, where's the bad guy going to get us from? You're at a concert. You're wondering who's going to drive in and run you over. That's
Mm-hmm.
not, it's just not a healthy way of living. And
Yeah.
where, like, you check your lock 7 times throughout the night, and you need to come in and clear your room or something. Like, honestly, it's probably not helping your life. And I'd say
Yeah.
there's other ways that I've changed that I keep. And one of those is, like, I clear every intersection. I don't
Mm-hmm.
trust that the other driver is going to stop when they should, even if they
Yeah.
got the turn signal on, because I've been to enough fatal crashes. And I'm okay with a little bit of that hypervigilance. That's
Yeah.
going to keep me safer, because I've watched people just blow right through a red light. So I don't mind keeping the ones that make sense in my life while challenging the other ones and reminding myself, hey, I'm off duty. I can put my hands in my pocket. I can sit with my back to a door. Like, just no one knows who I am right now. And I mean, it's a bit different for me. I'm in a small town and people do know who you are, but I still find ways to turn off and just feel safe, and to let my guard down a little, and to really, essentially, from a scientific perspective, find a way to intentionally activate your parasympathetic nervous system. Let your body rest, digest, recover, sleep. Like, I have a sauna. Like, that's a perfect example. Before
Mm-hmm.
bed, you go in the sauna and it helps you sleep better. Every time I do it, I wake up feeling more refreshed and feeling better, because that's what you're doing. It's kind of putting a name to the science of what is kind of happening for us. And yeah, I was off on stress leave for a few months, and when I went to a naturopath and they did these tests on me. They're like, your growth hormone, your testosterone, all your good chemicals are like 1% of what they should be at. And it made sense that when I'd go in the gym, I couldn't lift what I used to lift. So I'd still
Yeah.
go to the gym every day, but my strength was coming down because I wasn't sleeping and because I was drinking to manage some of the other problems in my life. So you start seeing the changes, but you can't see them when you look in the mirror. You just wonder, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I getting weaker? Why am I going to a gym and getting weaker? But you know this, like, you don't get better from your workout. You get better from your sleep after your workout.
No kidding, right?
What happens if you can't sleep? And like our job, I don't know if it's what it's like for you guys, but they don't teach us about sleep. So we're gonna go throw you into night shifts and call outs and like, I mean, I told you about my day yesterday. I went in for a workout before a day shift, which I try and do most day shifts. So it worked out about 5:30. I start shift at 7, and I got a shift at 2 in the morning. Like, that's a long day. That's like, it's just so
It's a
draining. It's
huge day. Yeah, like
hard
say
to
that
wrap.
back
Yeah.
again, right? So for the non first responders listening, you start your day at 5 in the morning, right?
Well, 5:30. Yeah.
5:30, yeah, and you ended it at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Is that like two at work or two at home?
I was leaving the office about 1:50. I live
Yeah,
about 3 minutes away, and I still had a bunch of gear to deal with because I kind of have two different roles. Like, one's patrol and one is ERT.
yeah,
And our call went from me being on patrol to me needing my ERT stuff. So I had to go and sort through my ERT gear. So then I still had to like
yeah,
rejig your gear and be ready to go because even right now I'm still on call. And if we get
yeah,
an ERT call, like, I got to run out the door, which is just kind of part of the job.
yeah. Well, the listeners will excuse it if this ends abruptly. Then I'll
Yeah,
put on some song and
I'll
dance
feel
and say,
bad.
"Hey, to be continued." We'll have them back on. But no, I mean, like again, you're covering all these things. So I hope that the listeners are taking note of all these little nuggets, and very relevant to your book about trauma and about resilience and about wellness and self care. But dropping these little nuggets like going to a naturopath and figuring out your actual stress hormone levels and your testosterone levels, right? This is something that I experienced firsthand as well. Like, I'm a huge fan of naturopaths. For me, it was trying to fix my sleep, and it was I was working graveyard and working in canine, which was very like a lot of stress spikes, right? Responding around the area, not just my city, trying to look for tracks and in situations where you might need to deploy the dog. But yeah, I would drink coffee all day, all night, up until the point where I was driving home and I was exhausted. Right, I was rubbing my eyes, I was rolling the windows down just to stay awake enough to drive home and get into my driveway and get in my garage, still sipping on black coffee. Right, so anyone who's done a little bit of research will say, okay, that's clearly not the path to good sleep, and you're correct. So I would sleep for roughly 4.5 to 5 hours, and then I'd wake up alert, right? So tired but wired, and then that's a huge cortisol spike. That's huge stress hormone, right? I could not sleep, so I would get up, I'd sit on the couch, and I'd make coffee, and I'd have about 3 cups of black coffee until I had enough, this stimulated, this fake, forced energy to do what? Go to the gym. And if you're lifting weights, if you're working out the way I enjoy working out, that's more stress hormones. So I'm just grinding it through, and I'm trying to do productive workouts. But now I can look back and say, yes, this is exactly what tanked my testosterone. This is exactly what created all the stress on my adrenals and all this chronic cortisol. Um, Also, I'll share with you, I was doing low carb and I was doing intermittent fasting and all these other stressors on your body. So, yeah, I love that you even threw in that little bit about sauna. Just for a lot of people, there are a lot of resources that you can find of trying to hack your sleep a little bit more naturally. For a lot of people, if you raise your body temperature before bed, like a sauna or a hot shower, and then afterwards, your body cooling can help you get into that parasympathetic, right? And so a lot of people recommend, a lot of doctors recommend a cooler environment for sleeping. So that helps your body kind of trigger that, right? So you do a cold shower before, that could have the reverse effect where, again, that's stress, right? You're alert. It's what you do in the morning if you want to wake up. So yeah, a little tangent there, but yeah, man, you're hitting on all the things that I connect with directly. And so I'm glad that you're bringing them up for, hopefully all those people in their 20s that don't have to repeat exactly what we did.
Yeah, Eric, you mentioned a lot about sleep there. Would you be okay if we dive into that a little deeper? Because I think
Yeah,
it's
let's
such an
go.
important topic for people.
For
So
sure.
first off, you talked about coffee. I mean, the reality is we're going to be tired with shift work, right?
Hmm.
That's going to happen somewhat. Um, but what no one teaches us is the half life of coffee, and it's
Yep.
actually, it varies person by person, but it's pretty long. So a lot of times it's like 5 or 6 hours is pretty common. So you're having that coffee as you're getting home. Like the caffeine's not even hitting you yet. You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah.
mean? So like
That's
by the
crazy.
time you get home, you have a shower and now you try and go to sleep, you're at your peak level of your caffeine starting to hit you.
Hmm.
Like, and that's what we're doing. Like,
Yeah.
how many times have you sat down at 3 a.m. for a coffee with someone on a night shift because you're all tired?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then you want to go to sleep at 5 or 6, but it's like you just drank most of that cup of coffee.
Yeah.
That's what your
I
body.
wasn't,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
So the thing is, I was not falling asleep. I was crashing out. I was basically passing out from exhaustion, right? I would probably brush my teeth and then basically just about strip down just to fall into my bed and pass right out, right? That's not falling asleep. That's a different issue. So,
Well, and
absolutely.
that's such an important topic. So I studied sleep a lot because I had a lot of traumatic nightmares and problems with sleep. So I had to learn for myself to teach, like, because I needed it. So the first thing, pretty much everyone knows what circadian rhythm is, but a lot of people don't know you have a second process that operates independently, but they kind of combine together for your sleep, which is, you could describe it as like a buildup of sleep pressure or the chemical adenosine. So those two things interact to make you feel tired. And for most people, those both come together at night and then you sleep. But for us with shift work, you get off in the morning and now your environmental factors are telling your circadian rhythm it's daytime and you should wake up, right? And meanwhile, your adenosine and your sleep pressure buildup is telling you you're tired. What we're really doing with coffee is we're masking our sleep pressure buildup. We're masking so that caffeine binds to that same neuroreceptor preferentially. So it basically blocks it. A good analogy, it's like taking a painkiller. You could do opioids and they're masking your pain, but that pain's
Mm,
still there. And so we're
yeah.
really tired. The caffeine doesn't make you not tired. It just makes you not feel how tired you are in that moment. And so for me, I've had to learn how to adjust my environmental factors a lot better. So one of those is how I use stimulants and caffeine. I take pre-workout, I take caffeine, but I do it earlier in the day. I don't let myself take it pretty much after like midnight, unless I need it to stay awake. There's times when I get a call out and I'm going like 400 or 500 miles and all night. So, okay, I'll take a Red Bull or some sort of caffeinated drink and I just sip on it. So rather than just crush it and then you get a big buzz and then you come down eventually, I just keep sipping it enough that I won't like drive off the road essentially and try and just use it just to manage
Like
myself.
a drip IV. And
Yeah,
notice
basically.
notice folks how he said take a Red Bull. You're treating it like a drug, like a medication, like a tool, which I think is very appropriate to recognize.
Yeah, but there's some other key parts here too. So another one is prescription sleeping medication. I'm guessing you probably know and shift workers who use them. I certainly do. Um, but what some of the sleep experts I follow talk about is that it's not really sleep, right? If you need it, and I have a prescription for sleep medication, so I'm not saying don't have it or don't use it. Consult with your doctor, all that, but just understand that the top experts say like you're not getting about 80% of what the good of sleep, like the restorative factors, the REM sleep,
Hmm.
the again back to testosterone growth hormone, the good things that are happening aren't happening for the most part because sleep is not nothingness, right? When I was young, I thought sleep when you're dead. I don't have time for this. Who
Yep.
cares?
Yep.
And it was the wrong way of looking at it. And now I see sleep as crucial for both physical and mental health. And the
Yeah.
top expert I follow for sleep is Matthew Walker.
Yeah, he's
He wrote a
great.
book called Why We Sleep, and he says sleep is bidirectional, or sleep and mental health is bidirectional. So when your sleep starts to decline, your mental health can start to decline, and as your mental health declines, your it can impact your sleep. So the number one thing I took away from him was just how important sleep is, like that we need to prioritize it. Even as a shift worker, we can do things to mitigate some of the impacts of sleep. We can't fully overcome it. So like I now try to adjust my environment. blackout blinds, an eye mask, or, something to block out noise. Like, because really what's happening with your circadian rhythm is partly you're interacting with your environment, and that light tells you it's time to wake up.
Yeah.
So if you want to have better mental health and better sleep, adjusting your environment, like you said, just understanding that you're meant to sleep in a cool environment, just understanding that by warming yourself up, it makes your body cool itself down and will help you sleep. Those kind of things are the things that will pay huge dividends in the long run, because over a course of a career, if you can get an extra hour or two of sleep a day, like that's a massive amount of your sleep debt that you're not owing.
Yeah, for sure. And have you heard of this? I think Matthew Walker talks about it, but a lot of the sleep experts do. But that study where they had people sleeping, they shined like a green laser light on their knee or on their calf or something, but they could actually track sleep disruption through that little bit of light, right? So it's not even like an LED light; it's just a laser pointer on you. It's a green one. The person would never know it when they woke up, but they could actually track that your body recognizes that, and your sleep was deteriorating, right, in an otherwise pitch black room. So very few of us sleep in pitch black. We have blackout curtains. It's not pitch black, but I'm a day shifter, and it's pretty good, right? But even these little things like, hey, do you have a TV in your bedroom? And we don't. A lot of people do, but I'll say, hey, like, make your decision. A lot of people would recommend you don't bring a TV into the bedroom. You don't want that blue light, TV, phones, even some e-readers, right? You can mitigate that with blue light blocking glasses, things like that. But also, when you turn a lot of your electronics off, it has that little light, right? So this is me when I travel in hotels, whether it's for work training or whatnot. I usually unplug. I'm sure they're pissed if I forget, the hotel folks, but I usually unplug the TV. I usually unplug the alarm clock, or I turn it face down or put a pillow over it. I'm the weird guy that does that because I can see all that emanating light, and now it throws me off. I can notice a significant difference to my sleep quality if I don't do those things.
Well, let me ask you, is it weird or is it smart?
I think it's smart.
So do I do the
It
same
works for
thing.
me. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about optimizing health, right? And if you're a first responder, there's no doubt that you need a prime mental faculty. You need your brain optimized. You need your body optimized. You need to perform, right? And you look at it, and yeah, that culture, I'll sleep when I'm dead, YOLO, let's go hard and fast. Man, it doesn't work. And you look at the most successful people that rely on their body and or brain, CEOs, executives, like entrepreneurs, celebrities, athletes, pro athletes. Like, are they all sleeping? Yes, they're all sleeping. Before anything else, those are probably the more non-negotiable things.
It's like a super drug. It's like the miracle drug that most of us aren't taking. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
be healthier, happier, smarter, like memory, if you want to remember the things you need to remember, and if you want to forget the things you need to forget, which includes the hurtful, painful, traumatic memories, that's happening during your REM sleep,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's why we need it. What actually I'd love to suggest is I'll share a couple of things that have really helped me with sleep, and then I'd
Yeah,
love to even hear from you some of
for
what
sure.
you've learned for you and like those little habits you were just talking about. So the biggest one for me was actually getting a sauna has been huge, and I struggle to make time for it, so I don't use it nearly as much as I would like to. But when I have a sauna at night, like the only way I can describe it is like it relaxes you, warms you up, it helps you to cool down after. And I think it just activates your parasympathetic nervous system and lets you calm down, because sleep is meant to be the extreme opposite end of fight or flight, right? If you think of like fighting for your life at work someday, sleep's supposed to be the exact opposite of that. Like it's supposed to be you at extreme rest and recovery, and your body needs that rest and recovery. So that's huge. A second thing for me is I learned to love sunsets. And I don't mean to
Mm.
sound like cheesy or weird about it. I never really like I grew up somewhere flat that never really had a view, that it just never really called to me. And then when we moved up here, we actually have a really nice view of a sunset. And I would watch the sunset, and I think it, like the sauna, would help me sleep better after. And
Well,
this was
that's
at
nature. That's yeah. It's what
a,
your body's geared to receive.
it was at a time when I was struggling with like nightmares and reliving calls and essentially traumatic stress. And I didn't understand some of the science, but I heard Andrew Huberman talk a bit about it on his podcast, where he says the different colors. So like the color of the light in the morning is meant to like activate your system and wake you up.
Mm-hmm.
But the kind of like reddish, orangey colors at night is meant to like tell your body it's time for sleep. And it's meant to essentially activate your parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
The other part of that he talked about is our gaze. So when we go, instead of like having this intense focused type gaze that we often have, when we can spread out our gaze, more of like a wide panoramic gaze, it does the same thing. It tells us
Mm-hmm.
like it's safe to calm down, and it helps us get ready for sleep. So it's something I just started doing without knowing there was science behind it, but it
Ah.
really helped me to like calm down and sleep better. And I think it was a part of me getting past some of my problems with sleep.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, right? You think about gaze and just releasing that focus of your eyes, right? Because why would you be hyper focused on something in nature in a natural state? It's well, you're looking for food because you don't want to starve, so that's stressful, or you're looking for predators and danger, which is stressful, right? And so, but what do we do? A lot of us do right before bed. We look at our phones, right, and we're reading, and it's the blue light that is similar to the sunrise, right? So it's triggering that. So I think the little things for me are we've talked about them, but I'll say, I guess underline that is, now coffee. I'm a pretty hard cut off at noon. Being a day shifter, people make fun of me. They want to get coffee in the afternoon. Sometimes I do to socialize, and I'll get a cup of decaf or iced decaf, and they're like, "Okay, old man." I'm like, "Yep, I am." And you know what? Like, I'm not going to mess with my sleep. This is a very tangible thing I can curb. Um, Other things are just things that alter your physical state, right? I'm not, if I can prevent it, sure, I'll work out if in the evening or afternoon if I can't in the morning. But yeah, if I go hard in the evening, that's going to keep me alert too much. And even how we end the day, my wife and I, it'll be, we were better about shutting off all electronics for a little bit, but sometimes I'm just too tired to read, read a book or whatnot. So we watched comedy, right? And we both wear blue light blocking glasses, and I noticed that it helps a lot. I can sleep pretty well if it's it's a sitcom on Netflix that we've been watching or we're rewatching. So we're really not having to think much about it. We're just enjoying it and laughing a little bit. Whereas watching Top Gun Maverick earlier this week, man, that took me on some rides and I hadn't seen it before. So I noticed the next morning I was exhausted, right? Because I was still thinking about all the excitement and the twists and turns of the story. So if you haven't watched it, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it. But it was very exciting. But not the best thing right before bed.
Yeah, totally. I had to change my habits. Like same thing, get away from electronics and video games and social media, all these kind of things at night and go for a walk. Take your dog for a
Mm,
walk. Be out in the darkness, like let your system calm down. Um, Another important part of sleep, especially for cops and first responders, is that like trauma and traumatic nightmares. And like, no one taught me about that. But like, I dreaded going to sleep because I would routinely relive some of the worst times of my life at night. And I like, then you wake up just in a panic and like, it's so impactful. And I hated it. And so then now like for me, I became afraid to go to sleep. So what do? I start drinking. Like you
mm,
feel a level of stress and anxiety around. I wouldn't drink during the day, but like now it's getting dark. It's night. Like I know I need to go to sleep, and you're dreading it, and then it's actually making it worse. And I
yeah.
didn't know it at the time. And for me, well, I had different traumas in my career, but some impactful ones were around like suicide by cop attempts. So I've had a few different people try to make me shoot them at work, and I did not shoot them. Um, but that's what I would relive. And I wouldn't replay the exact same event or exact same call. My mind would just always typically replay a different version of needing
Mm,
to shoot someone. And what I didn't realize is that's common, right? Like now that I've been doing this a long time, you talk to enough people who've told you about those kind of things. And I've read books. Like there's a book called Shots Fired by Chuck Rylant, where they follow a bunch of officers um, with their experience of a police shooting and then after. And so many of them, their life, basically almost all of them, their life falls apart. And
mm,
many of them talk about that, the nightmares where your gun won't come out of the holster or the trigger won't pull or the gun falls apart or all these different things, right? It's like the way I describe it and what I think's happening is like our subconscious or unconscious mind is trying to process these things and prepare us for the next one, right? It knows like, wow, this could end your life. This is really impactful. And it's trying to help you prepare for it. And what I started doing around that was eventually, and it took me a long time to get there, was journaling. And I think that helped me to take some of my stressors from my unconscious and consciously process them. And I think that was it was a real turning point for me when I started to get better. And just let me, like, honestly, I kept a log of my nightmares next to my bed at one point because I just didn't understand. And if I didn't write them down, I wouldn't really remember them the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And it just helped me to make sense of my own world and to then be able to let it go. Where like I was diagnosed with PTSD, I don't know, 2016, I guess, maybe 2015. But I don't really live with almost any symptoms of PTSD anymore. And I haven't for
That's
many
huge.
years. And I think I was a victim to that diagnosis for a long time. Like it was devastating to hear. It made me feel like I was worthless and not capable of anything. And it was terrible for me. Um, but then I kind of eventually managed to get some control. Like, oh, I can control my sleep and that will impact things. I can control my drinking. And even that, like that sounds so easy, but it's not when you're in it. Right. And I've watched that with friends where like you can't stop drinking and you don't want to admit it to yourself, but like that's how you cope. And you think that's what's helping you cope with the stressor, but it's actually making it worse. We just can't
Yeah.
see it in the moment.
So let me ask you, what helped you recognize that your drinking was, one, not helpful, and then what helped you curb that?
I had started like researching these kind of things, like the health and wellness. And somehow I heard it. I can't remember what the source was or what I even heard. And I ended up saying it to my psychologist. And his analogy, the way he described it's like, yeah, when you're drinking, it's like there's gates that are holding your nightmares in. And it's just like opening
Mm,
the gate and it lets the nightmares come through a little easier. And I actually had this moment when I yelled out in my kitchen when I woke up and I'm like, why the fuck don't they teach us this? Why did
mm.
I suffer for so many years, like 10 years, and no one taught me? And I had to teach it to myself after figuring it out and wondering why I'm crazy and sitting around in my basement by myself. Um, so that again, I can't recall the exact source and what things I started to learn, but I just realized like, wow, it's impacting me. And then you see it. So I woke up one morning and I'm normally like pretty much a non-drinker. Like I have the social drink, but like I'm not a big drinker.
Sure.
And I remember thinking like you feel hungover, right? And I remember thinking like, wow, I need to quit drinking. And I actually said to myself, like, I can't.
Mm,
And eventually I had to shrink my timeline down to like micro goal setting. Like, can you go an hour? And I'm like, I can go an hour. And then you just kind of slowly build on that because I knew I didn't really drink until the night anyways. And eventually I got through one day and like I have a little whiteboard on my fridge. And I wrote like, I didn't drink yesterday. I won't drink today. And first the goal was a day and then the goal became a week and eventually the goal became a month. And at that point now you've got new habits and you've like regained control. But I've watched numerous other friends within policing go through similar things where you see the alcohol's negatively impacting them. Sometimes they don't want to admit it. Sometimes they kind of know it, but they don't feel they have the ability to change it. Um, and it's so detrimental, but it's often how we've been taught to cope is go have a beer with the team after work. And then eventually just kind of starts to spiral out of control. And I think that's where what I'm trying to do with my book and you with your podcast is by talking about it, we can normalize the healthy coping strategies because these other ones have been hurting us.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a couple pieces I want to review, and one being that you listen to what Mark was saying and how he was working on this. It was not one singular thing, right? You write about in your book at the beginning the power of journaling, right? So you covered that, and that's one of the notes I wanted to cover with you. But you talk about how helpful it was to journal, and that's related to your nighttime traumas, your nightmares. But also you're talking about your psychologist, right? And also you're talking about how you're doing your own research and you really took ownership on trying to learn and figure out how you could help yourself. And so this is my encouragement to everyone. If you're listening, you're already on the right track, right? You care about these topics. You care about whether for yourself or sharing them with your peers. We have to be our own advocates, right? We have to take an active role. And you weren't taught these things. I know that some of it was taught. They introduced Gil Martin when I was in academy, and I think that they're doing a better job through the years. But we need more. We need more, right? So although we've heard about these stresses and how we go through the roller coaster, between Gil Martin and Dave Grossman and and even people that are introduced to Matthew Walker and Huberman and all these excellent resources we have now, we still need to be retaught. We need to be reminded. We need to revisit all these different topics, or else we're going to forget. We're going to get back into the rigmarole of our shift work, and life's busy. And yeah, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to cook. I don't have time to work out. We all know we need these things. And so it certainly doesn't help, it certainly doesn't hurt to get a review and relearn them all.
You're right. And I think what you're saying, like you're describing the functional application of cultural change, because that's what happens. Is like, it's one thing to just do a one-off course and tick a box and pretend we've changed it. That's worse than doing nothing, because then you're left with like the moral injury of like, but you guys said we're going to do something about this. You guys said we meant something about this change. And what you're saying with the retaught and the reminded about these kind of things, that's having it actually be ingrained into the culture where it's normalized that we can talk about mental health. And I'll say, like, I'll sit around the briefing table and tell people about failing a psychological exam, being on stress leave, all kinds of symptoms of PTSD, from nightmares to panic attacks to anger and rage and yelling, and alcohol abuse. Because when you normalize it, it's all these scary things that we typically isolate with, right? Oh, no one can ever know. They'll think I'm crazy. They'll take my gun. They won't let me get this great spot or promotion or whatever. And it's not true. And we're the ones who get to change the culture. And what happens with your the reminded and retaught aspect you're saying, like, when culture becomes ingrained, it just becomes a part of the normal discussion. It just
Yeah.
becomes normal for the people to interact in that way. And that is kind of where we're in this phase of shifting. Like, at some point in the past, we didn't do this at all. Not at all safe to
Right.
talk about. If you said this, you're removed, you're no longer operational, you're fired, you're terminated. And eventually we get to a place where we teach recruits even more about it, and where the chief is sending out an email saying, hey, I went through this. And like, it's so normalized that it's more safe, and that people don't feel they have to hide it, because when we hide from it and we run from it, it gets worse. And I really think the more that we can normalize healthy coping strategies, the more we can reduce the impacts of it. I had a call recently with Dr. Nick Carlton, who's one of our top researchers in Canada on this topic, on all kinds of like police, first responder, mental health. And what they're finding by studying our organization, the RCMP, about 50% of operational or of cops in our organization have a diagnosable mental health condition. So between PTSD, depression, anxiety. And as he said, that number's not static. It can change. Like, if we can change the culture to normalize our experiences and normalize the healthy coping, we can greatly reduce that number. And I know some people who've been through all kinds of really hard, terrible, traumatic things who don't have any symptoms of PTSD, who did in the past. So basically kind of like what I've said for me, but because they faced it and they developed good strategies, like, they come through it better. And the ones who hide, run from it, or mask the pain, often suffer longer. And I'll say, like, I learned this from Dr. Jody Carrington, where she said, hey, you're carrying all this pain around in your backpack, but you can just put it down here in my office and it can just sit there. You don't have to carry it around. And like, I had a fatal car crash where I had to tell a family they had lost a young daughter, and I was a new 2-month cop and I wasn't ready for it. And it rocked my world for like 10 years. If I thought about it, I would break down crying. I couldn't talk about it because I carried a piece of their pain. And you mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, but one of his quotes is, pain shared is pain divided. We're meant to have empathy. We're meant to connect with people, even strangers. And so you go and see the worst day of someone's life, and it becomes a trauma that you carry. But what I didn't know is I didn't have to carry it for 10 years. And I want to teach that to both our current, first responders, but also our new generation, so that like now when I go to those, like I took one that would be comparable, but it was like a child sex assault. And it really bothered me. And like, honestly, I ended up crying after. It was terrible. But then I processed it. Then like I took that call after having written a chapter about emotional pain. It doesn't make me immune from feeling emotional pain. It just means that now I have a healthier way of expressing it so that I can actually put that pain down in the psychologist's office or talking to someone in peer support or whatever that way is. We all have different ways, but find a way that works for you. And if you're trying something that doesn't work, try something different because there's lots of different ways. It doesn't need to be just talking to a psychologist. That's one part, but the connection of your peers is a huge part. Some way of expressing, like you mentioned, even watching a funny show on Netflix, just laughter and comedy right there is a stress relief. So there's so many ways we can do it, but it's just normalizing what we go through and normalizing how we cope with it.
Yeah, I love that. I love so much of what you talked about. And it's a lot of the things I really wanted to talk about today, right? And that's culture change and how we can normalize things. You have a section in the beginning of your book about the stigma and reducing the stigma. And truly, it's by example like yours, leadership by example, right? We got Mark here saying, hey, I've had these diagnoses, I've had these fears, I've had these concerns, I've had these obstacles. And sometimes I do, sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but it's okay, right? It's normal. And just the fact that, PTSD is more and more being categorically presumptive in our job. That's huge, right? That's literally legislation saying, hey, yeah, it's likely to happen after so many years in this job. But it's just normalizing it, right? You brought up the example of a chief saying just that same thing. I mean, what better way to lead and show your whole organization, show your people, hey, I'm not immune either, and I'm committed to this. I'm starting to see a little bit of that trickle in through the news, whether it's a chief or I guess whatever role that's called out in the UK, but saying, yeah, mental health is one of my biggest priorities for my officers because they carry a lot of trauma. And if they don't deal with it effectively, we can't take care of the public effectively. I mean, what greater statement to the community of officers as well in the organization that this is a commitment. I'm going to give that statement, and then now I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And we need more of that. And I think it's coming. I think it's trickling in, but not without the continued conversations that we're having now.
Yeah, that's what their job is. Like I think sometimes leaders and managers, like they're good at what the job they used to do, so they get promoted, and then they lose
Yeah,
sight of what their real job isn't to go take calls,
it's
right?
a
And I
different
think most
job.
chiefs, I hope, know that. Like it's not to run around taking the calls; it's to actually set the environment so that those of us still doing the job. And I'm a frontline cop. I'm not promoted. I'm not a sergeant. I'm a constable. I work general duty. If you call the police, I'm the guy that comes, right? And like the job of the bosses is to make it an environment where we can do the job and to support us with it. I think much of the misconduct and problems we see in policing, mental health plays a huge role in it, right? Like if you can't sleep all night and you're getting drunk all the time to cope with all the pain that you're trying to handle, how do you think you do when you go to that call? Like how much empathy do you have to give someone? Because having a lot of empathy is hard and draining and tiring. How much do you think you have to give? Do you think you're going to be the cop who pulls someone over and like has the patience to talk to them? Or do you think you're going to be
Right.
the guy who just yells at them? Because I would guess you're probably going to be one yelling at them. And that's like, so that's how we change the culture is we normalize what we go through. We normalize help to get better from some of these things and that we can. Like you talked about the diagnosis aspect and we've referred to PTSD quite a bit, but like I now think of it as a psychological injury. So technically I was diagnosed with PTSD, but as I started to learn that I could control some of it, that's when I realized, oh, I can control my sleep, my drinking, all these different things, and I can start to get better. And now like I don't see it as I have PTSD. Like if I live with basically no symptoms for years, do I still have PTSD? I don't know. Do I really even have it? Like at the end of the day, a psychologist makes a subjective determination based on a bunch of criteria in a book. What does that really mean? Like to me, it doesn't really mean a lot. And that's my own version of my experience. And there's lots of people who talk about post-traumatic stress and they drop the D or post-traumatic injury. Up here in Canada, we have some terms like operational stress injury that
Mhm.
we use that are impactful. And that's That's what I use when I describe it typically, is just call it a psychological injury. And it, I think, gives me the power to heal, which is huge.
Yeah. I love that the fact that you pointed out really early on that you've had that diagnosis and that you've recovered significantly is very hopeful for the listeners, right? And to have a counselor on here, Johanna Wender, saying why she's so excited about working with PTSD and working with first responders is because it's so treatable. And when she put it that way, I'm like, this is exactly the common conversation we need, right? It's not a sentence to the end of my career. No, it's very manageable, but we have to try things. Just like we talked about before, and you just said again, hey, we need to find different ways to set the backpack down. And for some people, that might be a psychologist's office or going on Zoom with a counselor. Other people, it might be literally, hey, find what makes you most mindful, whether that's getting out in nature, whether that's turning the phone off, putting it on airplane mode, if for but half hour to an hour, right? Going to a quiet space, watching some comedy, right? Going on a walk. Um, my wife and I have this kind of joke where we say, you never regret a walk, because sometimes it's hot out now this time of year. It's getting hot. It's getting uncomfortable. Sometimes you're just tired. But whenever we come back, whether it was a 5 minute or 20 minute, we're like, I feel better, right? It doesn't matter if it's raining, pouring, whatever. Like you always get something out of it. You always feel better for it. So just to think about those things that build you up, that those are the things that are going to help you recover.
Yeah. And like, I think you hit the nail on the head that for different people, it's different. And like, I learned to like yoga. I never would have thought I would like yoga. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, I'd have been like, you're nuts. I learned to like gardening. I can't believe I
Yoga's
learned to
too
like,
hard for me. I'm a wimp.
you know
Yoga's
what
hard.
though? Have you ever tried yin yoga? I don't know if you know what that is, but it's kind of just like slow, relaxing stretching.
Mm,
And it's so good for you, like especially in
yeah.
this world where we're always ramped up and always lifting and sore, like just
Yeah.
getting to just hold these slow long positions, very very relaxing. And like I say, I started gardening. I actually just planted my garden the other day. My kid loves it. It's something we do together. We go
Nice.
pick things from the garden, we make a shake or a salad or something, and it's awesome. And again, it's not something I ever thought I would like. Comedy was big for me too. Actually, around the time I went off work, um, I started doing like improv comedy and stand up comedy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just a little bit here and there. Did a few courses on it, and it was so good for me to just joke about things. Like humor diffuses like tension, right? So we got all this stress, and even like you have problems in your life, find a way to like make a joke about some of it. Like for me, I'll share this, but like one of my stressors was my relationship with my dad. Like the first joke I ever told was about how my dad can't say I love you to me.
Mm,
And I mean, how many people out there can relate to that? How many people have a dad who learned that feelings are not to be talked about? Feelings are
yeah.
not safe. That was my dad. And so I eventually learned how to say I love you. And I said it to my dad, and he'd say, okay, dad, I love you. Okay. And I'd
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
like, dad, when someone says I love you, you're supposed to say I love you too. And he's like, I know. And it's so
Yeah.
true though, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
you've talked about this as a man, like it's we have this mental model that like feelings are weakness, and I'd say actually it's the opposite. You want to show courage, be vulnerable.
Hmm.
Courage and vulnerability are like highly interconnected, and that's hard to actually be vulnerable. Most of us, that idea of sharing your hard moments or your feelings or being real open and honest is super scary,
Yeah.
right? And that there comes power and strength in that. Like, and to me, it's been really good for me because now my dad can say I love you, and he phones and tells my kids he loves them, and like a
Oh,
lot
that's
of
huge, man.
good has come out of that.
Yeah.
And I think that even ties in a bit to the hardships of the job. If you want to be a frontline cop for a long time, you're going to see hard things and there will be negative consequences, but there can be good too. Because my dad phoned me and told me he loved me for the first time when I was on stress leave because he knew I needed support. And I'm sure that was really hard for him. As much as it really shouldn't be, it was. And it meant a lot to me. And it's been a real positive thing in my life that I probably wouldn't have had if I didn't go through hardship. So like I think when we go through that, we make meaning after, right? I don't think it's even that you find it by accident. It's that you choose to make some meaning out of your experience. And even now, we had a fatal recently and a couple next of kins in a weekend, like pretty challenging weekend. And it's my reminder to like tell the people in your life you love them, to enjoy each day, because you aren't promised a tomorrow, and nor is your loved ones. And like my parents are in their 70s. Who knows how much longer people have? So choose to like go home and call them. Because I had to go and tell someone about their parent died, and they broke down and they were just, you know, it was a really bad day for them. And for me, it was a bad day too. Like, because I'm tearing up just having to tell them, right? I'm a human too. And I think we have this idea that we're meant to be this RoboCop, and you have like, you're this emotionless uniform. You're not,
Hmm.
you're still a person. And yes, you will have to overcome your emotions to do some really hard things, and like some of the danger, like we often talk about fearlessness. Oh, they went in so fearless. And you're like, no, you still feel it. Like I feel fear pretty frequently. Like that's dangerous. This is a very dangerous person with a weapon, and this is a dangerous situation. I feel a level of fear here, and it's healthy. It keeps us safe, but you choose to overcome it. And I know you've talked about some pretty, I would say heroic calls you've been to and things you've done that are like very commendable, like good for you for doing them. But it's not that you just, oh, I didn't even feel afraid. You're like, that's
No.
bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm telling for anyone who wants to be a cop out there, when you get the call of a shooting or, like something that's super legit, you're going to go, you're going to have a, oh man, like I might get shot here.
Hmm.
That's not off the table. And you're going to do everything you can to stop it. And I actually had a call that turned into a pretty dangerous call about a year ago. And I wrote a letter to my family at the end of it. Like my wife was pregnant and I had a son who was about 3, and we crashed at about 60 miles an hour in a high risk arrest. And the guy had a loaded gun and the power lines came down, and like I was in the
Man.
passenger seat. So there was a lot of ways that like
Uh,
could have ended very differently. And
yeah.
I realized it. And I came back like, hey man, I'm going to write a letter to my family that they'll have, because it's the stuff I'd want my kids to know if I wasn't there to teach them. And I would feel bad if I wasn't, but at least there's something there for them. And I actually just added that to the end of my police culture chapter, where
Hmm.
I essentially write a bit about police culture and a bit about anti-police culture and like what we need to understand about those who don't get policing and don't like policing. And then I share that to give them some perspective of like that cop who's pulling you over, who you think telling you to put your hands up, or like, well, he's been through some pretty dangerous things and that impacts him. And he wants to go home to his family too. So hopefully it can help people to just change their perspective a little bit and maybe see the other side.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You covered a lot of ground here, and I think it's just a recognition that we got to keep it positive, right? We got to recognize we have an upward direction we can go for ourselves in spite of the trauma in this job. We just need to be better ready to address it with all the resources and tools, and lean on each other, take care of ourselves so we can take care of each other and take care of the community, right? And even the pieces of empathy. I mean, that's, if you want to summarize how to fix all the world's issues, um, his name escapes me, but the war on kindness, the book. But basically, it's just a call to empathy and how we could fix society's ills if we just try to understand and level and humanize each other, and give grace, right? And so, and I love that you're talking about the different sections of your book, and we've covered a lot of the main topics, but I know we could go on for hours, and I'd love to have you back when you're down. I know you're a busy man. I'm a decently busy person myself, but please tell us more about your book, when the listeners can expect to see it drop, and where they can find it, where they can find you, and get in contact with you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Eric. Yeah, it's called Setting My Sights on Stigma. I'm doing it as a self-published author, so I'll be putting it on Amazon. Um, my plan right now is to have it out for the end of June. So we're recording this here in May. I'm still operational cop with call outs and all that. So it's been pushed back a little bit in the past, but it'll be out soon. So just watch for it on Amazon. And it's just really my attempt to share a lot of the hardships I went through. Um, and in a way that can help others, and the kind of stuff I had to learn the hard way that it took me 15 years of policing to experience some of these things and really learn how to manage them better myself. And it's the stuff I've been passing on one-on-one as like a mental health instructor, a peer support, a field trainer, all these, just the kind of lessons you share one-on-one when you sit and talk with someone, and just trying to share it on a bigger scale. So you can check out my website. It's just my name. It's Mark Bouchard, and Mark with a K. Bouchard, Bouchard, and it's .ca, which is obviously the ending up here in Canada. I put book summaries on there, like journal articles, like academic research, where I kind of translate it and make it really readable and give you a little summary of like, hey, you don't want to read academic research for an hour? Well, here's a 5-minute summary. I have a free
Save
chapter.
you the time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that stuff's hard to read. I have
Yeah.
a free chapter from my book on there, and even like some appearances of other podcasts and stuff. I know you and I have been on some of the same places together, or separately, but the same places, so that people can go check that out as well. I don't really post a lot on social media. I do have accounts I post fairly infrequently. Oh, I got a couple blogs on my website as well. But yeah, just really trying to, and also honestly, sharing in podcasts has been one of the best ways, because people can listen while they're driving, while they're working out, while they do whatever. And I love getting a chance to dive into these topics. So I definitely want to thank you for having me on, Eric, and thank you for what you're doing. Like, this is important. And I'll say, from the first time I heard you speak about policing and mental health and your experiences, I could tell that you get it. You get changing the culture. You get that balance of operational policing and like finding a way forward in a healthy way for us as the officers doing it. And I think what you share is courageous. Like, you talk about being a dad, you talk about being a man, you talk about being, a husband, and all the things that are important, because it's not just about being super cop. You need to have a healthy life to be a good cop. So I think what you share and that vulnerability is courageous. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks so much, man. And truly my pleasure to have you on, and to connect with such a like mind is fantastic. And you're truly a leadership by example. You're a leader by example in displaying that. So excited to see your book. I mean, I've gotten the peak, but I'm excited for everyone else to see it. And yeah, so clearly for anyone listening, you if you don't know by now, you clearly haven't been listening, but Mark is a wealth of information, anecdotal research. He shares so much of his experience, and it goes into some of the nitty gritty. So there's little bits and pieces that you heard today in the last hour or so where you're like, man, I really would love to hear more about that. We can have him back on, but you can also look forward to his book, where he dives into all the nuances of wellness and trauma and his journey and his learnings, putting that out. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I'd say to the listeners, don't hesitate to reach out. Like, I've had people where I go on a show and they'll send me an email or follow up with me and make some great connections. And sometimes, tell them a book to read or send them a book or just find some way to try and help them and keep paying it forward. So, yeah, again, thanks for having me on. It's been a blast. I'd love to come back on someday, and thank you very much.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, we can make a plan for sure. So thank you all for listening. And again, share this out, share out Mark's website, his information. It'll be in the show notes. And yeah, I mean, together we're going to be stronger, better cops, better community. Tune in later.